Okay, good evening and welcome to the Ealing Joint Committee, and I'll ask everyone to introduce themselves and who they're representing. I'm Councillor Yvonne Johnson. I'm the Cabinet Member for Schools and Children's Services, and I'm joint chair with Mandy Hudson. Mandy, do you want to say who you are for the
committee? Yeah, so I'm Mandy Hudson. I work at the Ellen Wilkinson School for Girls. I'm part of the National Education Union, and so that's why I'm here tonight.
Thank you. Dee, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Dee Higgins. I'm Treasurer of Ealing NEU and I teach at Ealing Alternative Provision.
Thank you. Amanda?
Hi, I'm Amanda Calver. I'm a primary school teacher of Year 6 at Fielding Primary in Ealing, and I'm on the NEU committee as well.
Thank you. David? You're on mute, David.
Got it. Thank you. The saying of the lockdown. Yes, I'm Councillor David Milliken. I represent the Conservatives and I speak on education for the Conservatives, so I'm here in that capacity.
Thank you.
Mark? I should also say I'm a governor of a couple of schools. In fact, I'm governor at where Amanda is, at Fielding and Ealing Fields High School, and I'm a director of the Grand Union Multi-Academy Trust as well. So.
Thank you, David. Oh, sorry, I'll go along the bottom line now. Stefan?
Stefan Sims, Ealing National Education Union District Secretary and National Executive Member for Outer West London, Greenford High School.
Thank you. Matt? You're on mute at the moment.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm on Ealing NU committee as well. I'm also a school rep and maths teacher at Twyford High School.
Thank you. Tamara? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Tamara Quinn, Assistant Director for Planning and Resources, Ealing Council.
Thank you. Mark?
Hi, Mark Nelson, Head of Schools HR Consultancy at Ealing Council.
Misha?
I'm Misha Jalil, Democratic Services Officer at Ealing Council.
Thank you. Sandra?
I'm Sandra Felix from Member Services, Ealing Council.
Thank you. Julie?
Hi, I'm Julie Lewis. I'm the Director for Learning Standards and School Partnerships.
Thank you. And Sharon?
Hello, this is Councillor Sharma here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as I said at the beginning, apologies from Miriam Rice. And we have somehow or other got to sort out the fact that Binda's not on this committee as far as she and I are concerned, but somebody has made a mistake somewhere. We'll have to sort that out outside. Declarations of interest. Well, we're all sort of involved in schools in some ways or other. So in that way, we've all got some sort of interest. I'm a retired member of the NEU. When I was a member, it was the NUT, and now it's called the NEU. But that's just, I should declare that. Sharon, were you in anything when you were a teacher?
Yes, I'm with the NEU as well.
Yeah, okay. And so, and David is obviously a lay person in that respect, but obviously a governor and so on. Okay. Urgent matters. I don't think there's any urgent matters. At some stage, can I ask the committee clerk to get a copy of my signature from Labour Group office, because they have copies of signatures. Are the minutes approved of the 3rd of November?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And then that brings us on to item 6, staff guidance for schools during the pandemic, council side. So I imagine that might be all our council officers. Is it Mark first or whoever?
It is me, Councillor Johnson, so I shall say a few words if I may.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so in terms of recent changes to staffing guidance, the biggest single issue will be the fact that shielding is paused from the 1st of April. I've sent guidance to head teachers about that, and the guidance to heads did confirm that the shielding will be paused from the 1st of April, that clinically extremely vulnerable staff should still work from home where this is possible, and that's what's in the government guidance. But we realise in schools that's very unlikely, and if it's not possible, and CEV staff are being asked to attend the workplace, then we've put in our message that the workplace must be COVID secure, and if necessary, the school should look to its generic risk assessment and review that to consider the implications of bringing back staff who've been shielding. The individual risk assessment should also be reviewed and updated as necessary. And we've confirmed to schools, but they're very used to this now, about having a sensitive and supportive discussion with the member of staff to understand and address any concerns that they may have about returning to the workplace. Because for some staff, it may be some months since they've been in school, depending on where they fit with all the various lockdowns and shielding guidance that's occurred in the last year. We've also pointed out to schools that the actual date of pausing of the 1st of April may be the last day of spring term for a couple of schools, not a lot, but for some, because a lot of schools will have closed on the 31st of March. And we've asked heads to consider what or if there are any benefits in bringing a CEV member of staff back to school before the start of the summer term, which is the 19th of April. So in summary, that's what we've said to head teachers. We haven't as yet updated our staffing guidance because we're waiting for our good trusty colleagues in the Department for Education to update their guidance to schools, including the sections on the school workforce. Of course, the guidance won't just cover clinically extremely vulnerable, it will cover other groups. So in particular, pregnant staff and the clinically vulnerable. I'm not expecting there to be many changes to groups who have already in the main been attending school anyway. I'd be interested to see what, if anything, they say about pregnant employees, because certainly as the pandemic moved on, the guidance for that group got more robust and rigid as we went through. But obviously with shielding now being paused, I would expect that to be reflected in any new guidance. But as I say, we're waiting for that, for the Department for Education to update their guidance. And as soon as they do, we'll update our guidance, and then we share it with the trade unions anyway. So I'll pause there. That's a good word to use, pause. I'll pause there to see if there's any questions or issues at this time.
Do people want to put their hand up or do the symbol? Who would like to ask? Yes, I think you're first, Stefan.
Thank you, Mark. To follow on from a conversation that we've had in private, but with a question aimed at the council. We welcome your comments, especially with regards to a few schools coming back on the 1st, still being open on the 1st of April. And as we have previously said, the NEU nationally doesn't actually have a position quite yet, but will be soon, with those who are CEV but have yet to have been vaccinated the first time and the second time. And as we also know, the vaccine isn't at full strength until 3 weeks later. I'm also aware, following our discussions on other occasions, that there are some CEV staff, whether they've been vaccinated or not, are quite keen to return back to work, even though the government is advising them not to. My question is for a few members of staff, or I think it's a dwindling number of staff, but I feel it might be still a few, where they haven't had both vaccines. They are CEV, they are trying to be vaccinated, but they might not have had the second vaccine, and 3 weeks would have elapsed before the shielding stops. So my question to Yvonne is, will Ealing take a supportive view, which is a temporary one, for if those scenarios do happen, and they may, that Ealing Council will recommend that schools take a sympathetic view and wait until those staff who are CEV have had both vaccinations, and they've had a 3-week addition to enable the vaccine to be at full strength?
I think I haven't been vaccinated yet, Stefan, because I'm stuck in the house and I can't even, the district nurses won't come out. So when I'm more fit, I'm going to have to go somewhere and be vaccinated. But people, there's constant emails. Teachers are a #1 priority. So if teachers can't get vaccinated and they're something or other, Cheryl Curling, I think her name is, has been sending out emails. If anyone's got an issue, please contact the council and they'll tell them where to go. I'm sure they'll help them. And then we can look at things case by case. I'm sure that's the case, Mark, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we've already set out that schools should be supportive with staff and look to understand and address any concerns or fears. So if, for example, a CEV member of staff approached ahead and said, look, I'm really worried about coming back. I haven't had any vaccinations yet, so I don't feel protected. I don't see that the response of the head will be, dragging the person back into school kicking and screaming. That just won't happen. They've dealt with this a lot over the last year, and I'm confident that anyone that needs continuing sympathetic approach and supportive approach to returning to work will get that.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
I'm sorry, did you want to keep asking Mark questions?
No, just to end, say thank you for that response, Mark, and to say that I think that as time passes, the number of people that actually applies to will continue to dwindle.
Yes, I think you're right. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else wants to ask Mark anything? No? The next one is exams and workload. Is that going to be Julie, or is that who's going to speak to that? Is that one of your items on the union side, or is that
the next 3 items are from the union side?
Okay. Now, okay then. So at the last meeting, you were concerned about the exams, and I remember myself and Julie saying that we didn't know what the government would decide, and it was a bit too early. But we know now it's going to be assessments, etc. It's all going to be done in a different way. But say what your concerns are between you, or who wants to go first? Is it Stefan or is it Mandy?
Before we do, Julie, is it possible that you could give an update on your understanding of what is going to happen to the exams in the summer? You might be more up to date than we are, please.
Quick update. So the initial guidance on how grades would be awarded was published by the DfE on the 25th of February, with the overall aim of the measures to ensure that grades are awarded as a reasonable exercise of academic judgment of the students' demonstrated performance. There you go. A range of evidence can be used, including assessments to be published by exam boards at the end of March 2021. And we know that those materials are not out yet. Exam boards will also publish quality assurance guidance in March 2021. Students are made aware of the evidence used before the grade is submitted, but not the grade. Results days, A-level, 10th of August, and GCSE, 12th of August. And students may ask the school to submit a formal appeal to the exam board. And yeah, I mean those are the very brief headlines. I can say more about implications, but I'm sure you're probably wanting to chip in on workload, etc.
I do, but I'd like to hear what your view is on implications before we respond, if possible, please, Julie.
Yeah, we're meeting with high school heads tomorrow, and this is on the agenda, so we're very keen to hear from them. We're very aware that the demands on schools, and particularly on subject leaders, those responsible for curriculum areas, are considerable in terms of their own standardization processes, quality assurance processes internally. We know that the submission of evidence has to include work done under controlled conditions. we're not clear yet how many schools are going to be using the materials that are being published in March, but I suspect that those materials will be used. It's a very, very difficult landscape, I think, for everybody. Extremely difficult to do justice to the kind of potential that many of our students will have had. I think it's very much a best endeavours and working to do the right thing for students. I think the workload that will potentially be generated from the appeals process will be considerable, not least because it appears that appeals are actually sort of being promoted as a way forward for students who are unhappy with their results. And if they do appeal, then schools will have a duty to supply all of the evidence used to the exam board. So there are, it really does, the whole thing rest on the integrity of individual teachers, the integrity of schools, and there are some unanswered questions, certainly around quality assurance and how that's going to be conducted, and the way in which schools may be selected. We know from the previous year that schools that have significantly improved their overall performance, may be looked at with some through a critical lens, maybe identified for QA, which may not be fair, but it's difficult to see, how else that QA process is going to unfurl. So I think in summary, it's a very testing few months ahead for staff, for leaders, and for students. It's a very difficult thing, I think, for anybody to get right. And we'll be obviously urging schools to do the very best they can for their students.
Thank you, Julie. So did you want to come back now then, Stefan?
Not just yet. I'll let Matt go first. And
Oh, yes. I think Mandy's first, and then I'm not sure who's after that. Right, you go first then, Mandy.
Yeah, I mean, I think Julie's absolutely right in how she summed that up. I mean, as the sort of within school trying to manage the teacher assessed grades, I think it is about workload, and it's about how schools can manage that alongside other things. And so if the secondary school heads could be encouraged to make sure that they have a priority list of workload, so that teachers don't get overwhelmed. I mean, the heads of department, subject leaders, I think it's a very big task for them, but classroom teachers too may find themselves overwhelmed if they've got lots of other things to do as well. So I think that would be useful if priorities could be set for staff, so that then they knew that they could prioritize the teacher assessed grades rather than sort of having to do everything.
Thank you, Mandy. Who wanted to go next? Is it you, Mel, or Matt? Sorry, Matt, go on.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Mandy just said, and I also appreciate the comments by both Julie and Mandy regarding subject leaders and heads of department. It's going to be a monumental job because we have GCSEs and A levels in secondary school to go through. So with us, that's 200 odds year 11s, and I think we have 120 doing A-level maths in my case. So that's 320 students we're going to have to assess in some way. So it is going to be quite a lot of work. And I think a lot has been said around workload, which I agree with. My concern is more, I think what's fresh in memory is the algorithm fiasco from last year. And it's, like I said, all this work we're going to put in for our students, and which has rightly been pointed out is for the benefit of them, and taking into account the situation of the past year. it would just be a shame if once again all that work we put in is just simply sort of wiped out by an algorithm, or sort of shoved into a bell curve like it is normally anyway. So I was just wondering what the comments are from the council's side, or anyone actually in that respect, because I mean, I'm going to put a lot of effort for my GCSE and A-level classes, and I don't want to see their grade reduced just because some computer thinks it knows better than me after I've worked with them for, in some cases, 5 years. So that's just my question, really. Thank you.
They do say that they're not going to use those algorithms this time, that they're going more on what you say and the evidence, etc., so as to avoid all of that fuss that there was last year. But as Julie said at the beginning, if you happen to be in a school that in the past had perhaps not the best reputation for exams, and suddenly there's a year group, which we will all know that there's a year group that everyone's expecting to do well, you'll have to get that evidence out, whether it be Yellis tests or whatever tests you've done, the predictions and so on. So it's going to be a lot of work. I can see it because I was a secondary school teacher and I taught both GCSE and A-level, and I can see it as nightmarish. I've also had individual emails from children, young people, sixth formers, who are worried about what's going to happen to them and if their school does it properly, and they're concerned. So I think it's, in a way, it sounds like it's going to be better than last year. I'm wondering if some of the material that Julie's talking about are going to be sort of like little mini tests or exams that they're going to sit them, and I think Julie's nodding. But as they haven't been published yet, none of us know. So, Julie, is that true? Do you think there'll be some sort of like testing or controlled assignments that they want?
Yeah, there will be. We think there will be sample tests. I think what we are slightly a little bit concerned about is the sort of potential inequalities of access to those materials, given that they're going to be produced before the Easter break. So that's something that we want to talk to heads about tomorrow. I mean, equally, as a when I was a head of English in a large secondary school, it's kind of eye-watering, the implications in terms of workload for those carrying that responsibility. And I don't envy you at all. I think it's very, very challenging. And to think that you could do all of that work and then a normal distribution curve, sort of deflate the grades that you've awarded would be very demoralizing. So I'm entirely sympathetic, and really what we should be doing is supporting young people to move on to the next stage of their education and training, and we shouldn't be making the next few months really high stakes. We should be doing everything that we can to support that progression and that journey. So I'm afraid I don't have anything more to add, other than I do feel for schools, and what we will be doing is working with schools to try and adopt consistency of practices, and I think we're very lucky that our secondary schools are so collaborative and do work so well together, and I think it's a great testimony to their collaboration, that they do work to have to approach these things as one group.
Thank you. Stefan's first, and then David. Stefan.
It's okay, Yvonne. I'm quite happy to let Dee and others come in before me.
Right. Dee, did you put your hand up?
Yes, I did. I just wanted to echo. Yes, I did. I just wanted to echo something that Julie just touched on, really, and it's about this notion of transition and how difficult that is going to be for our young people at all stages. Actually, it's not just about going into do A levels or go on to further education. It's actually to transition from primary into secondary, and each transition stage, and not to underestimate the huge amount of anxiety young people are facing going through these assessments, not assessments, teacher evidence, not teacher evidence, all at a very late stage, to be told before an Easter holiday that you may get a controlled assessment, but we're not sure what it looks like. And I just want to share my concerns really about transition and how difficult that's going to be moving forward.
Thank you very much. David?
Yeah, thank you, Yvonne. I mean, my understanding is that just to repeat yours, Yvonne, that there are going to be no algorithms laid on top of the results, the teacher assessments that that you will be or teachers will be making. But I would have thought that, I mean, I'm stating the obvious really, that the pressure will come with the appeals, I would have thought. So there presumably will be some sharp elbowed parents that will be pushing there because their loved one, their child, their son, daughter hasn't got the grades they want to get into the university they want, or whatever it is. And there'll be a pressure. So I would have thought that's where the pressure, therefore, it all down to the accuracy of the work in the lead up to it, and making sure that the grades stack up with the ability of the child or the student. So I mean, I'm just stating the obvious really, and I'm sure all teachers are aware of that.
Thank you, David. And then Amanda.
Yeah, I just wanted to just pick up on something that Matt said, kind of knowing his students for 5 years for some of them. We've been living in this sort of exam culture for so long in this country. It is now time to empower teachers to make those decisions. And I think if we can get it right, and like countrywide, not only Ealing kind of being at the forefront of that, if we can get that right, then we can change the way that we treat our children and young people in this country. Because coming from a year 6 perspective, we've not talked about SATs yet, but already my children are feeling that stress, and their mental well-being is also being knocked by COVID, as has everybody's. But we're talking about a group of children that are used to being tested from very young age. And actually, this is an opportunity for us now to try and change the status quo that's been in this country and sort of crippling our children. So I'd just be interested to hear what people's thoughts were on us, trying to lay the groundwork to make sure that we can do this successfully in the future, and it's not just in times of crisis. And also if Julie could shed a little bit of light about what's going to be happening with SATs as well.
Let's do all the questions, then we can come back at the end. Then I think Mandy and then Stefan. No, Mandy, you don't. Okay, Stefan, go ahead now then.
Partly following on from Councillor Milliken's comment about the appeals, because I actually agree with that too, that there is going to be pressure on that, and head teachers will be aware of that. So if you're meeting them tomorrow, I have no doubt that the head teachers will be aware of the amount of workload that's going to be, and they'll have that they'll have that pressure. At the same time, they'll have the same pressure in terms of trying to ensure that their assessments of the grades is robust. And the only way they can make the assessments of the grades robust is more workload for members, because that will be more work in order to demonstrate it. And so if you're meeting with the secondary heads, well, then this meeting is timely, Julie, because as the whole profession has struggled to keep with the workload, and what one head teacher said to me, keeping up with the government's trying to make the government's impossible demands possible, and the huge strain that both head teachers and staff have gone through, to then, now that we're back and hopefully stay back in schools, the pressure to ensure that the grades are robust enough to withstand any challenge from the government will mean that heads will feel the pressure to increase the workload rather than reduce it. And even though they may be aware of that and will try and resist that, there has to be a way in which that can be looked at. And we would ask that there is consultation between the secondary high school heads and all the unions, or ourselves and the NSUWT, in terms of seeing if we can find a way forward that manages to satisfy all quarters, although that is undoubtedly going to be difficult. The other thing I wanted to say was a more general point that Amanda was talking about, because you talked about high stakes, and I think I've said in a previous meetings with you, Julia, and with others, that the high stakes testing culture that the English system has got means that 25% of teenage girls aged 14 to 16 self-harm, and the principal reason for that is exam stress. We have a high stakes testing culture. It affects year 6 students falsely worried about if they don't do well in the SATs, will they go to the school that they want to go to, all the way up to GCSE and A levels. And so this is a very good time for the government to review GCSEs and A levels and SATs, and to move away from this high stakes stress inducing exam factory culture that we've got in the English system. And I stress the English system.
Stefan, I know that that's your view and it's some people's view, but I don't think that's something that Julie and I can really comment on. It's something that obviously the government decides in the end. And I understand what you're saying. I absolutely hated controlled assignments. I thought they were no better than coursework. Coursework, you didn't know if there was who was doing it, really. You were meant to question them when you discovered that the language wasn't really their language, and you had to sign something to say you thought this was the child's work, when you know probably their sister, and some families, the parents probably did it for them. But with controlled assignments, they had to do that over a certain amount of time. I really felt sorry for teenage children in our schools with all that coursework, controlled assignments, doing 9 subjects. I thought it was ridiculous. And I don't know how some poor children ever got a chance to be children, because they were so burdened in years 10 and 11. But I used to think this is completely crazy. But it's the exam system we've got. People vote for governments. They say they want to have this, that and the other. And this, we can have a view. I go to all sorts of London-wide meetings where people talk about all sorts of things. But to be honest, I don't think the government are going to be spending a lot of time. I think it was like 2 weeks ago, Gavin Williamson saying this is not the time to review GCSEs. So I don't think they're going to be looking at them at the moment, to be honest. They've got too much else to do. So obviously it's a view. I think children are over tested and have too much pressure put on them. I agree with that. And they haven't got enough time to go out and play and be children, especially, and teenagers should have a chance to have a bit of fun and watch silly programs and send each other silly emails or whatever. But I do honestly think that they are over tested in this country, but that's something that's just sort of grown over time. I don't know if Julie wants to say anything.
That wasn't the main point. I mean, it's important for us to state the NEU's position on.
Oh no, I understand. Yeah, no, that's fair enough.
My concrete request was that if there could be consultations between the high school heads and the unions in terms of how we move forward together for the sake of the staff retention, the pupils, and that there is consistency across the board, not just in terms of the exams, but also in terms of how all staff and how all teachers are going to be able to manage this. So it's a request to would you please pass on our request that there is meetings with the local head teachers, secondary head teachers, and teaching unions to look at how we can manage both workload and come up with a system that works. So
we can certainly pass that message on, Stefan. But if they're not getting some of these things till the end of March, there's not going to be a lot of time. And I can see what Julie was hinting at. Some schools I know will get their leaders to download this stuff and send it out to their students straight away, while other schools, the teachers will have a holiday as they're entitled to. And it's always difficult. I know in the private sector, they'll be probably checking who's written the exam and giving them practices over the holidays and sending them off for online tutorials. You know, we all know those things happen. But certainly we can pass that on. And I know what you're saying. It depends on the head. Some heads are much more reasonable than others. I work for one head who used to ring a bell like in a pub to say, get out now, because staff used to work too hard. And they'd be there till all hours of night. And they'd want to be in every day in the holidays. And she used to say, no, you can't come in every day. And she'd have a caretaker walking around with a bell saying, go home now. But it's true, David, you'd be surprised. That does happen. And there are other schools where the head teachers maybe put pressure on people. And we all know that heads of department get called into the office and have to speak to the head and deputy and say, why were your results not as good as whatever? So it's a very difficult situation. And all of you who are secondary teachers and responsible for things, you've all got your lower school teaching to be getting on with as well, and your form class to look after, and all your normal jobs. So maybe head teachers have to be sensible and say, well, if you can't mark your lower school books for 3 weeks or 4 weeks during that period of time, so be it. You'll catch up later. So I don't know. Schools will come up with different things. Julie, I don't know if you want to say something.
Oh, I just think, we're in such a unprecedented time, that any leader worth their salt will be, entirely tuned in to the temperature, how their staff are themselves, impacted by long periods of partial closure, intensity of online teaching, and suddenly kind of swinging back into this landscape, and trying to do your very best to put together evidence for every single young person that you teach is huge. And I think, I don't think we should be sitting here, anticipating that, somehow school leaders are going to get it wrong, and that, I think we're in it together. We've got to try and do what we can, not expect unrealistic, have unrealistic expectations of adults or of young people, and going back to David's point, actually, that really the quality of your internal processes, any strong subject department should have really good internal moderation and standardization processes. And if you've got a culture and really strong systems in your school, then that will alleviate the strain later on of excessive appeals and all of that stuff. So I do think it's worth always worth investing early on in high quality standardization, so that teachers are constantly looking at each other's students' work to standardize judgments about grades, etc. So it's always putting in the work early on always pays off, and there shouldn't be some mad scramble at the end, and we shouldn't be in a situation where any school is having to submit lorry loads of additional evidence to back up a decision that they've made. So we'll be doing everything that we can to avoid that.
Thank you, Julie. Any more questions on that? No? Can we go on to the next item? Stefan and I have had lots of correspondence on this. We agree to differ on this. Stefan, do you want me to say my bit first?
Did you see the last?
I did.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I'll start. When Stefan said to me that he was worried about Catholic academisation in Ealing, I spent a couple of days ringing up governors in Catholic schools in Ealing of different political persuasions, and I don't want to name some of them because they wouldn't want me to quote them in public. They assure me that letters do come from the diocese. One of the letters from the diocese talking about it in November got leaked. There's no big problem in Ealing, according to all the people I spoke to. Most people said that anti-academy that I spoke to, and that was across parties, they would like more money, but they don't blame Ealing. They're quite happy with Ealing. They said they'd like more money, but they know that's coming from the government. They don't want to academise. And then I went further afield and discovered from various people that Westminster is looking at areas where there are a lot of academies in Hertfordshire, etc., and trying to pick off schools there to join up academies, Catholic, Mats, etc. Then Gary Redhead went and spoke to some of the Catholic heads in the borough and said, have you been asked to do due diligence on your buildings, etc.? No. So there's no problem in Ealing as far as I'm concerned. It's exactly the same as it was 3 years ago. And I don't want teachers in Catholic schools worrying about something that doesn't exist. But I accept Stefan's view that some parts of London, apparently, Tower Hamlets and I think it was somewhere else, may have had letters. They may well have bad relationships with the diocese. I also got told it isn't even the cardinal, it's a couple of bishops, it isn't even some of the lay members who work for the the Diocese of Westminster. And I'll say this as a Catholic. I know most of my friends in Catholic schools say they just say, put that letter in the bin, forget you've had that. We're very happy as we are. We're not wanting to move. And one secondary school, which I'm not going to say much more about it, other than they were asked this January, would you like to lead a Catholic mat in Ealing? And they said no. So go ahead, Stefan.
Thank you, Yvonne. Yvonne is quite right. There has been conversations and email exchanges on the matter. And I recognise and agree with almost everything that you've just been saying, Yvonne, in terms of the good reputation that Ealing Council has amongst their Catholic head teachers and the desire to stay. That there is no governing body that's been asked to look at due diligence in Ealing. And a number of your other comments that you've been saying, Yvonne, all that I recognise too as correct. Where our concerns isn't for the absolute immediacy, because we have seen the diocese plans, and their plans do include Ealing schools converting to a Catholic mat. So that is their intention, and the National Association of Head Teachers has reported that the diocese in other areas, not in Ealing, but in other areas, have used extraordinarily strong-arm tactics on chairs of governors in order to convince them that they need to academise their school. And the NHT was extraordinarily concerned about this, and I was part of a delegation that met with the diocese. It is also the case that Peter Sweeney has stated in public that there is that it isn't compulsory for any Catholic school to convert. And I've been informed in the same way that you've been informed that he actually said that in public, and we have that in writing. But nonetheless, it is still the diocese plan that they want this to go ahead. And I recognise that this isn't going to happen for Ealing in the summer term, although they may ask for it to be put on the agenda of the governing body. But that doesn't mean that Ealing has been ignored or has been forgotten by the diocese. We were, in terms of their plan, there were 6 local authorities that were earmarked to be academised, and Ealing was supposed to be part of the first wave. It appears clearly from both your conversations and mine, Yvonne, that isn't the case, but that doesn't mean we're not part of any wave. So the letter that Tower Hamlets sent by all the Catholic head teachers and the chair of governors saying, thank you very much, but thanks, but no thanks, would help to ensure that Ealing doesn't become part of the second wave. I recognise that we are not part of the first wave, but I'm concerned that once the other local authorities have been academised, that they will then come back to us. And I'd rather that be nipped in the bud now, rather than having to respond to that with greater effort later.
I don't want to sign a letter that will get up the nose of Westminster and bring attention to us when we're not on their radar. Of course, and no school wants to hand over 5% to a Catholic mat when they're just about managing at the moment. So I am not in the least bit worried about the bishops in, I'm saying this as a Catholic, you can't go to church in Acton anymore, so they can't read out anybody's letters. So their influence is less at the moment, because you can only go to mass online if you want to go, if you can get in and if you can get so on. So they can't actually influence in the way that they could. The parish priest, who's on governing bodies, are quite often sympathetic to state education. They're sympathetic to Ealing. You get the odd one that isn't, but I'm not worried. Truthfully, I'm not worried. And I know too many people parked all over Ealing of all political persuasions who aren't married either, Stefan. So I don't want Catholic teachers in Catholic schools to have anxiety or to be cutting themselves because they're worried they might lose their job or somebody's going to do something to them. Catholic governors, there's a shortage of them. They're always asking for people to go and be trained, and they haven't got loads of them. They may have a hit squad that they might bring in, but to be honest, most governors are fairly confident, assured people. And so if you give up all that time, as most of us in this room probably have, I've been a school governor for longer than I've been a councillor. And nobody's ever paid me. I've been on all sorts of schools, church schools and non-church schools. And I'm confident that I know the Diocese of Westminster of old. And the way to send them a letter like the one from that woman in Hackney is how to get up their noses and how to ask them to come in and annoy you. So I'm on live screen, but I'm saying the truth. I don't think that's a good idea. I quite understand your position as a regional officer, but it's not an issue here. If we get any notion or any wind, we'll keep talking to them. If we get something, and Julie's here, but I'm not going to say too much about this because it was confidential conversations I had 3 years ago with a Catholic head in another authority who wanted to come to Ealing. But when I said to him that we don't want Catholic mats, well, that was the end of our conversations because he only wanted to come here to set up a school with a Catholic mat. And I said, no way. And also he was after money, which we didn't have. And the borough he was in didn't have any money either. So he was going to go and fundraise somewhere. And Westminster has never done anything about him either. So I don't want us to get involved in the fight that's not our fight at the moment. We will keep talking to them. We'll keep a watchful eye. I've spoken to all the education officers. We will keep an eye on this because I don't want somebody to come in and strong arm tactic any of our governors or schools. And so, I mean, if I'm still going or my people who come after me, we just won't have it. And Julie doesn't want her Ealing Learning Partnership ruined because they've all been taken off somewhere. And we don't want the economies of scale of, say, they're all taken off in some mat. And I mean, I just don't want to do it. And I'm not signing any letters to anybody saying things that aren't true, that aren't happening in Ealing. So I don't know what the school situation. I will try and find out what Hackney and Tower Hamlets have done to get up their noses. But I'm not signing anything. I'm not getting involved because my main concern is Ealing schools.
Let's. My final request is let's just keep these channels open.
Yeah, of course. And I've been emailing you. I've been talking to you. Yes, Amanda. I cut you on mute.
Thank you. I just wanted to say it's really good to hear how passionate you are not to have the Catholic mats in there. And that's incredibly reassuring to me. I also want to say I don't want any mats.
No, nor do I. No, nor do I, Amanda.
Academies are absolutely horrific. And my opinion and the opinion of the NEU is that we shouldn't have them at all.
No, I completely agree. But in some cases, we've got no choice if a school fails its Ofsted and all those things.
If the school is strong-armed into it, feels compelled, especially at the moment when we've got, schools are going to be in a lot of financial difficulty.
Of course they are.
And I don't want them to be coerced, strong-armed into having to join what we know to be mats, and we know from personal experience and from our members that they are, without being too strong on it, they are toxic, and this borough needs to stay away from them as much as possible. So thank you very much and I'm really so pleased that you're part of the process to stop that from happening.
Well, and I say this as a practicing Catholic, and I still don't agree with it.
No, it's not Catholic.
No, I know. I feel it's wrong. I know there are academies that have been successful and that parents like, but and maybe there's been no choice. So I'm going to let David, so I'm not accused of being too party political on this.
Well,
so David,
obviously I heard you speak very passionately then. I'd just be interested to know what your view is of the Church of England Academy Trust in the borough, which has 4 high schools, of which there's a member sitting in this group today.
In fact, they've been much more reasonable than some of the others. For example, they give, this will upset Stefan, they give facilities time. They take part in lots of the things we do. They buy into things that we offer. They I quite like Alice. I think Alice is quite a sensible woman. They've been much more reasonable than some Matts.
What makes you think in a Catholic academy wouldn't be the same?
Because they can be a bit dictatorial in some places where the old priest has got too much control. And that's not everywhere. That isn't everywhere.
If I can add, David, just briefly, we have got examples across the UK, across England and Wales, where certain Catholic dioceses have converted their schools up north and have promised STPCD and Burgundy book, and then within 6 months or a year later, that's all been torn up. So the diocese has given us promises and then they've broken them. So we're very nervous.
I mean, Westminster, I get on with them quite well. I've known them for years, many of the people who work there, etc. So I don't want to irritate them or bring us to their attention. And I think the C of E, Matt, has been quite successful. We can't build schools. We all know we're not allowed to. And the only way that we could manage was with Alice taking over and William Perkins, wasn't it? And Alice has just helped us out, really. And I think she's been very reasonable. She talks to officers. I think she always did a good job at Twyford. People might have had, different views on their admissions policies, but I think she's done quite a good job. And I know that Stefan is quite keen on, he sent me a copy of a letter that he sent to her today, but on the whole, she's much easier to deal with than, say, for example, ARC, who parents love because it's strict, it's whatever. But I asked very naively when I first went to visit ARC, where was the staff room? I didn't know they didn't have staff meetings. You have briefings in the morning, they don't have staff meetings. But I just didn't know that. I found out afterwards. But they're very, very popular. And they're the only schools that if there's a gap and we're not allowed to build, they were the people allowed to build, and that's just the law. Okay, have we done it now then, Stefan? That one?
Thank you for your answer, Yvonne.
Yeah, thank you. And now 9, redundancies and projected school numbers. I think we all know that Brexit, universal credit, regeneration have affected schools in different areas. I've spent my life for the past 4 years not getting rid of staff, looking at the budget with a fine tooth comb. But I don't know if you want to ask Mark if he's still here about that, or what do you want to do? Tamara's here as well, who's the expert on school numbers and projections now.
Yes, more partly a plea to the finances. So our understanding across London is that 5% of London has left. That's partly due to COVID, as people go back to Europe because there isn't any work for them anymore. Brexit's largely East Europeans are returning back home, and social cleansing in terms of the credit system. That's particularly one of the reasons of what we've been discussing about the Catholic academisation, because most East Europeans are Catholic. I've had a number of schools, and I understand that there are going to be more schools that are going to need to be making redundancies. I've been given early warning that there's a few more in the pipeline, and I know that other London boroughs have had up to 9 or 10 of their schools already having to make significant redundancies. And there is also the situation with the secondary high schools, where ARC Sloane is going to be opening in September. Ada Lovelace is open and is obviously going from year 7 to year 8 and so forth. And the projected numbers for secondary schools, irrespective of the 5% drop in London because of the recent situation, means we are very concerned in terms that the high schools are going to have to make large numbers of redundancies, because it would appear, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it would appear that we've got too many high schools based on the numbers that we've got. And it's now worsened by the fact that there are that 5% of London has gone home. And now that the NEU also has support staff members as well as teachers, it's not so much teachers who are likely to be made compulsory redundant because they have the best chance of finding work in another school. There's also redundancies affecting the senior leadership team, particularly assistant heads and deputy heads. They're going to find that a little bit harder to find work than classroom teachers. But there are senior leaders in the NEU who are facing redundancy in Ealing as we speak. But the group of members that I am the most concerned about are support staff members. Support staff members are the lowest paid, although they do tend to be the main breadwinner. And many schools are not hiring support staff. In addition to that, many schools, in terms of the redundancies, it's affecting support staff the most. One head teacher in Southall told me that they advertised for a support staff post for a one-to-one based on an EHCP plan, and they had 100 applicants because of the job losses in Heathrow. So when support staff are earmarked for redundancy, they are the chances of them finding work elsewhere means that they're largely going to be earmarked for the dole. And so when I was speaking to some head teachers, primary head teachers, the concern is that do schools, and I'm sure this is happening, but can this be emphasized, or could you please explain what is happening? Are schools being reminded or reminded of what their direction of financial travel is, not just the business managers in terms of the training that they're getting, but also head teachers not just relying on their business managers, but they themselves should be keeping a watchful eye? Because what we would plead is that if a school can see that it is in 2 years' time going to be in deficit based on what they're looking at their finances now, that they start acting on that and alerting staff earlier, because the earlier staff have in terms of knowing that there may be redundancies down the line, the more likely that they are going to be able to find work, because they've got 2 years to find alternative jobs rather than 3 or 4 months. And I'd like to give one example where, without naming the name of the school, where it was a primary school where the head teacher was doing everything they could for very good, honourable reasons to spare staff from the worry or the fact that redundancies may be coming their way. And didn't want to put that burden on the staff, but but knew that this was coming years ago, and now that they've been forced, they've got no other choice because of the advice that you're giving or Ealing is given. Now they've turned around and said to senior teachers, I'm sorry, but some of you are going to have to go. We're making you redundant. But if those senior teachers were told years ago, they would have had the opportunity to find work and therefore not face compulsory redundancy. And in this particular example, those senior teachers are facing compulsory redundancy. And I would urge Ealing to continue to encourage head teachers to give as much warning as possible. And I would ask, in terms of the training for business managers and for head teachers, to look at their financial direction of travel, not just for this year, but for the next few years, so that they've got so that they can warn staff as early as possible to avoid compulsory redundancies. And I say this in particular plea for support staff who will not find jobs and will undoubtedly be on the dole.
Well, I think we've got what you're saying, Stefan, and there's a lot in that. I have been talking to Tamara about numbers, and I can just go briefly. We have got nearly every Southall school full for the coming year 7. They're packed chock-a-block, and I've had emails about appeals, etc. So all the year 7s are full for September in Southall. Acton High, Acton Arc has got vacancies. Norfolk's got vacancies. Alex Reed's got vacancies. I too have been emailing Tamara about what's going to happen to poor old Acton Arc when Sloane opens next September. I've always wondered about that. The primary schools, it's a very, very mixed picture. I've also been asking and emailing tomorrow about budgets across the whole of the authority and the schools with issues and problems. Believe it or not, COVID has meant that some schools have spent less because they haven't been able to do their after school clubs and so on and so on. But I'll hand over to Tamara, who might be able to give you a broader picture, and then we can come back to the support staff. Tamara, if you want to help.
Yvonne. So in terms of the secondary phase, Ealing has quite a high rate of children going across the borough boundary essentially to access education. So while the numbers remain low for those two particular schools, Ark Acton and Northolt, a lot of that is in relation to popularity rather than the levels of you know, the numbers of children in the area who would ordinarily access their local school. So that's a particular challenge around community engagement, standards, perception in the area, and those schools are working hard to kind of turn the tide on that. High school phase is going to continue to have high levels of demand, particularly in Southall. We see that for the next 3 to 5 years, the levels of demand continuing to be high, whereas in the secondary phase in the rest of the borough, the number of primary school students and those smaller year groups begin to come through over the course of the next few years. So yes, secondary schools will begin to be planning for lower levels of demand. Where you have schools that are particularly popular, the chances of them having lower numbers is quite remote, because you'll find children travelling from elsewhere within the borough and over borough boundary to attend those schools. We have very you know, well-regarded popular schools in Ealing, and there were just particular challenges for those two schools. In the primary phase, it's a picture across London, a similar picture across London, with issues potentially around Brexit, definitely around COVID, numbers of children potentially remaining abroad, and uncertainty about whether they'll be returning and requiring education. So we've seen lots of kind of in-year reductions that we wouldn't ordinarily see, and that aren't reflected in birth data. So the numbers of children applying for reception in September 21 is lower than had been expected. In terms of financial planning, there's been a big push from the local authority and lots of work in schools to have robust 3 to 5 year plans. I think it's safe to say a few years ago, many schools didn't really have robust plans in place. Many more do now. We regularly follow up with schools that we have concerns about, either whether that's through a combination of factors, largely through kind of pupil numbers and popularity, Ofsted outcomes, and financial management and planning. So we're in regular contact with schools at risk. So we proactively attempt to identify schools and offer support to them, and schools regularly come to us. We offer training to SBMs, as you say, Stefan, and we do governor training as well. And we, through the ELP, Business Sustainability Committee, that's a really key focus about what support needs to go in, what schools, what supports schools would like in developing their SBMs and senior leadership teams, and also deputy heads and sparring heads coming through, because those kind of skills are probably least developed as you come into a headship role in terms of financial management for head teachers. So it is a real challenge for schools. I think Ealing schools are relatively well funded, so while it's a particular issue for some schools, many schools still have large balances, and they're working to manage that over time. And we do encourage schools to communicate with their staff, manage where they can through natural turnover of staff to avoid compulsory redundancies wherever possible. And we do really encourage those schools who may not be acting as swiftly as possible, because ultimately if you leave you know, reorganisations further down the line, you may need to cut deeper. So there's active work ongoing with a number of schools to encourage that to happen more quickly, to avoid larger cuts later.
Thank you very much, Tamara. And in fact, everything I've said, if you think I shouldn't have said it in public, you can read it in a report and you'll see what the numbers are. They all get published in cabinet reports on education. So I'm not saying anything you couldn't read in the next couple of months. I think what you need to do, Stefan, is outside this meeting, where you're concerned about particular schools, I think we do this offline, because it obviously sounds like some schools are perhaps using the idea that it's easier to get rid of, say, 3 support staff than 1 teacher or whatever. And if that's the case, I think we do this offline. And I do understand what you're saying about that. So I think, I don't know if any school's doing that, but you probably do. And so if you just come to us privately and we'll see what we can do, I think that's the best thing. I don't think we should talk about support staff in particular schools. It wouldn't be fair. So if you could do that offline, is that all right, Stefan?
Yes, you're absolutely right, Yvonne. It would be wrong to talk about particular schools.
Yes.
The generic thing is the plea. I know that this is being done, but nonetheless, when there are examples, and I think you know the examples that I'm talking about, Tamara, where a head teacher, for very good reasons, for honourable reasons, tries to hold back the pain of doing it. But if they had discreet conversations, they would have avoided this situation. It's a genuine mistake. It's an innocent mistake. I just don't want to see that mistake being repeated.
I think, Stefan, head teachers have to be so careful, because you don't want to have somebody in your office and then be accused of what is it, constructive dismissal, and be taken to court or something. So the heads have got a really difficult job and balancing act. I know some of them in their talk about their budgets in their staff meetings at certain times of the year, and I can only give you one example where I know this head who said a couple of years ago that things were tight, and somebody came and offered to retire and come back 1 day a week, because when you're in your last 3 years, it's your last 3 years, the best of your last 3 years, isn't it? And
no,
so
that's changed now, Yvonne.
Sorry?
That's changed now, Yvonne.
Has it? Oh, well, anyway, this person came in and said, it's time for me to go. I don't mind coming in and helping out part-time. This person had a TLR, so that did help the budget, and that person just offered themselves because they were thinking of doing it anyway. So you're right. And Tamara's right, 3-year budgeting is becoming more and more common because we need to look at all the issues. So I think we've done everything. I had hoped we'd finish at 8 in case then if you wanted to go outside and bang or whatever people were doing tonight or lighting up. But thank you all for coming. Thank you for a very constructive meeting, and see you whenever we are due the 20th of May. Good night and